I smelled the mix of pretzels and diesel before I even saw them. North Station at rush hour was always crowded, but that night the noise pressed against me like a weight. College kids dragging duffel bags, tired commuters clutching briefcases, families hurrying to catch the 7:35. To get that to Fitchburg. All of them just passing through strangers moving toward normal homes, normal dinners, normal lives. And then there was me, Emily Harper, 19 years old, a first year at UMass Boston with a part-time job at a diner and a small room in Dorchester I called Freedom. I thought I had finally built distance from my family enough to breathe. I was wrong. They were waiting on platform 3. My mother in a tan coat she could not afford, her lips tight like she had been holding her breath for years. And beside her, slouched against a steel pole, was Rick Donnelly. My stepfather. My nightmare since I was 12. He wore his Patriots cap low, but I could see the red veins in his eyes and the clenched jaw that meant danger. The crowd flowed around him, unaware or unwilling to notice the storm standing in the middle of the station. My mother's voice snapped like a whip as soon as I reached them. "You're late." I glanced at my phone. 7:28. Not late. Not even close. "I'm here." "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice steady though my chest was already tight. Rick pushed off the pole, his boots heavy on the concrete. I stepped back without thinking, muscle memory from years of surviving him. "Don't play dumb, princess," he growled loud enough that a few heads turned. "You know why we called you." My stomach dropped, but I forced the words out. "No, I don't. So either tell me or I'm leaving." That was when Rick's face twisted the way it always did before he snapped. Only this time, he didn't keep his voice low. He shouted his words, rolling across the platform like thunder. $75,000. Your daddy's money. Where is it? Conversations around us faltered. A businessman checking his watch froze. A mother pulled her little boy closer. Rick jabbed a thick finger toward my chest. "Don't you lie to me. I know that trust fund hit your account last month. You think you're too good for us now, living off David's death money, acting like a queen in some apartment. That money belongs to family." My throat burned. "It's mine. Dad left it for me, not you. Not Mom. Me." My mother's face pinched like she had sucked a lemon. "Emily, keep your voice down. People are staring." But Rick wasn't done. He bellowed. "You'll give us that money, girl, every damn cent, or I'll—" His threat sliced off as he lunged. A blur of motion I knew too well. His palm cracked across my cheek with such force that the sound bounced off the vaulted ceiling. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My head whipped sideways into the steel pole. The impact exploded in white light and ringing pain. I tasted blood, sharp and metallic, trickling from my lip. The world tilted. I gripped the pole to stay standing, humiliation hotter than the pain. Phones were out now, cameras recording. A woman in scrubs had her hand over her mouth. A man muttered, "Call security." Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the sentence that cut deeper than the strike. My mother leaned in her perfume, cloying her breath hot against my ear. "Lower your voice. Don't embarrass us." My knees nearly buckled. Blood slid down my chin onto my blouse, staining the white cotton crimson. Strangers stared but did not move. Some looked away, others filmed. My mother adjusted her coat like nothing had happened. Rick's chest heaved with satisfaction, his eyes wild. Friday night, he barked, his voice carrying across the platform. "You bring the 75 grand or I'll come find you. And next time it won't be just your pretty face that gets smashed." He grabbed my mother's arm, dragging her toward the escalators. She let herself be pulled, never once looking back at me. My cheek burned, my head pounded, and I stood there bleeding in front of an audience of strangers. Some whispered, some avoided my eyes. None of them knew me. But one man did. Near the ticket booth, a conductor in uniform had frozen mid-step. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. His eyes locked on me, then on Rick, disappearing into the crowd. He moved with purpose, crossing the platform until he stood at my side. He offered a packet of tissues, his voice steady but low enough only I could hear. "Miss, are you all right? Should I call the police?" I took the tissues with a trembling hand. "I'm fine," I lied, pressing them to my split lip. When I looked up to thank him, our eyes met. A flicker of recognition jolted through me. He looked older than I remembered, hair streaked with silver lines carved deep around his eyes. But I knew that face, and when he said my name, my chest tightened. Emily. My breath caught. My knees wobbled again, but for the first time it wasn't from pain. I whispered Uncle Ben. After the station, after the sting of his hand and my mother's voice in my ear, I walked back to Dorchester in a haze. My apartment was only 2 stops away on the Red Line, a cramped second-floor room above a laundromat that rattled at night with the spin cycles below. Most people would have called it depressing. To me, it was freedom. The key in my pocket was mine alone. No one yelling when I closed the door too hard, no man demanding chores, no woman watching me with silent judgment while bruises bloomed under my skin. Just me, a bed pressed against the wall, a chipped dresser I had found on Craigslist, and the faint smell of detergent that never went away. Sometimes I would lie awake and listen to the machines humming below, steady and relentless, and it felt like safety. I had a routine. Morning classes at UMass Boston, where I was still finding my place among students who seemed more confident, more sure of their futures. Afternoons and nights spent waitressing at South Boston Diner, a corner joint, where the coffee was always hot and the regulars tipped in cash. I carried plates until my arms ached, smiled until my cheeks hurt, and collapsed into bed each night grateful to be building a life that was mine. Money was always tight, but it was manageable. Until the letter arrived. A plain white envelope from the bank sat in my mailbox the week I turned 19. At first, I thought it was another statement I would skim and toss, but when I tore it open, my breath caught. Trust account balance $75,000. Available immediately. My father's handwriting flickered in my mind. Faded memories of a man in work boots and a plaid shirt who smelled of sawdust and coffee. David Harper, the electrician from Worcester, who had been gone since I was 6. He had left something for me, something to make sure I would have a chance at the future he never got to finish. I held that letter like it might burn me. For the first time in my life, I had more than survival. I had possibility, but possibility doesn't stay secret for long. I should have known my mother would find out. She had always found ways of knowing. Old bills, gossip from relatives, things I thought I had hidden. It must have been the bank statement she intercepted or the cousin she pressed for information. However she did it, she learned about the $75,000 before I had even decided what to do with it. The calls started immediately. First, just from her, then from Rick. I ignored them at first, telling myself I didn't owe them anything, but the voicemails piled up like weights in my chest. Emily, it's your mother. We need to talk. Don't be selfish. That money is family money. Rick is getting impatient. You know how he gets. I threw my phone across the bed, once wishing I could throw their voices out of my head as easily. At the diner, I plastered on a smile for customers while my stomach churned. At school, I sat through lectures about supply chains and logistics while my mind spun with fear. At night, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the sound of Rick shouting across the platform. $75,000. He had screamed it loud enough for strangers to hear. Loud enough to strip away my privacy, to reduce me to nothing but a dollar sign in their eyes. I pressed the tissue he had bloodied against my cheek until the swelling turned purple and green. Each time I caught sight of myself in the mirror, I thought about my father. Would he recognize me now? Would he be proud that I had clawed out a life on my own, even if it was small and fragile? Or would he hate that the money he had left for me had become a weapon in Rick's hands? I made a decision that night. I would not touch a cent of it until I knew exactly how to protect it, until I knew how to keep it out of their reach. I opened my laptop and began searching, stumbling through terms I barely understood. Trust accounts, financial guardianship, legal protection. My heart pounded as if Rick might burst through the door any second, demanding answers. The glow of the screen lit my bruised face, and I promised myself I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Outside, the city moved on. Streetlights buzzed, trains rumbled in the distance. People carried on with their evenings. But in that tiny room above the laundromat, I sat with the weight of $75,000 and the certainty that my family would not let me keep it without a fight. I was 6 years old when my father, David Harper, died on a construction site in Worcester. They said it was an accident, a live wire he never saw, but in my memory, he was indestructible. He was the one who carried me on his shoulders to the town fair, who sang off-key lullabies that made me giggle, who smelled of sawdust and cheap coffee from the thermos he always carried. When he was gone, the world shifted beneath me. My mother, Susan, wore black for 3 weeks and then started wearing lipstick again. She said we had to move on, that crying would not bring him back. At first, I believed her. I was only a child clinging to the idea that she would protect me. But protection was never really her goal. Within a year, she met Rick Donnelly. He was everything my father was not loud, where my father had been quiet, harsh, where my father had been gentle. He was a former mechanic who had been laid off, a man who carried his anger like a badge. I remember the first time he came to dinner. He set his boots on our table like it was a bar and laughed when I wrinkled my nose. My mother giggled too, and I realized that her loyalty had shifted already. From then on, Rick was in our home, his rules filling every corner. By the time I was 10, I was expected to cook simple meals, vacuum, fold laundry, and keep my mouth shut. Rick liked silence unless he was the one speaking. When I asked questions, he snapped that I was too smart for my own good. When I laughed too loud, he barked that I sounded stupid. Every word, every action became a test. The punishment was not always physical, though sometimes it was. A shove into the wall when I forgot to sweep the kitchen. A yank of my hair when I talked back. Once one icy December evening, he told me to take the trash out barefoot. I slipped on the frozen porch steps, skin burning from the cold, but when I came back in shivering, he only laughed and told me to toughen up. Susan stood in the doorway, arms folded, not looking at me. She repeated her usual line. "He works hard. Respect him." It was the same line she used every time I tried to protest. Every time I tried to tell her that his anger was swallowing me whole. My childhood became a series of strategies. Count how many beers he had before deciding if it was safe to enter the room. Memorize the squeak of the floorboards so I could slip quietly upstairs. Hold my breath when he paced because sometimes even breathing too loud seemed to set him off. When I was 13, he shoved me down the stairs for forgetting to pack his lunch. I landed hard, bruises blooming across my ribs. My mother iced them silently, whispering that I had to be more careful, that Rick was under pressure. When I was 14, he locked me outside in the snow because I rolled my eyes. I pressed my hands against the glass, begging, while Susan sat at the table with her coffee. She mouthed the word, "Stop." That was all. Stop reacting. Stop fighting back. Stop expecting her to save me. By the time I was 16, I had learned to hide my tears. Tears gave him satisfaction. Silence gave me survival. But deep inside, a quiet rebellion grew. I promised myself that when I turned 18, I would leave and never look back. I would carve out a life that was mine, even if it meant working double shifts at a diner or sleeping in a room above a laundromat. Anything was better than bending to Rick's rules and my mother's silence. By the time I reached 17, my life had narrowed into routines of endurance. I worked part-time at a grocery store in Worcester, bagging groceries and mopping aisles just to save money for the escape I kept planning in my head. Rick demanded most of my paychecks, calling it rent, though I slept in a cramped room at the end of the hall with peeling wallpaper and a window that jammed shut in summer heat. Whenever I hesitated, Susan reminded me that families shared everything. But what she meant was that I gave and Rick took. He loomed over every choice I tried to make. When I talked about applying to college, he sneered that I would never last a semester. He said I was good for carrying trays, cleaning houses, maybe working a register if I was lucky. When I stayed late at the library, he accused me of wasting electricity. Each word was a hook meant to reel me back into his control. I remember one particular night when I returned home after closing shift at the store. The lights were off except for the flicker of the television. Rick sat in his recliner, beer in hand, eyes tracking me as I slipped off my coat. He asked how much I had made that week. When I told him, he held out his palm. I tried to keep $20 for myself, just enough for bus fare and a sandwich. He slapped the bill out of my hand and told me I was ungrateful. Susan sat on the couch, eyes fixed on the television, not moving, not speaking. The silence of her complicity felt louder than his shouting. What cut deepest was not just his fists or his words, but the way she validated them. He works hard. Respect him. That refrain followed me like a shadow, even when I knew it was a lie. By 16, I had learned to hide homework assignments to tuck away college brochures in my backpack so he would not see them. I began filling notebooks with planned scholarship essays drafted under the cover's checklists of items I would need when I finally ran. The diner job came later, after I had already left Worcester behind, but the seed of escape had been planted in those nights of quiet rebellion. The more he pressed down on me, the more determined I became not to break. On my 17th birthday, Susan handed me a second-hand sweater while Rick reminded me that I was almost grown, that soon he would not have to feed me anymore. I smiled and nodded, but inside I counted down the months. 18 would be my liberation. When the day finally came, I packed a duffel bag in secret and slipped out while they were still asleep. I took a bus to Boston with less than $100 in my pocket, my chest pounding with fear, but also with hope. It was not much, but it was mine. I enrolled at UMass Boston with financial aid and started working double shifts to cover the rest. For a while, I believed the past was behind me. The bruises faded. The echoes of Rick's voice dulled. I told myself that silence could no longer control me, that distance was enough. And then the letter about the trust fund arrived. $75,000 left by the father who had wanted me to have a future. The same father whose absence had given Rick room to fill our house with fear. Suddenly, the past I thought I had outrun came surging back. Susan's calls. Rick's shouts. Their greed wrapping around me like chains I thought I had broken. The money was supposed to represent freedom. To them, it was nothing but a prize to claim. And once again, I was the obstacle standing in their way. The bruise on my cheek had barely begun to fade when the message came. It was short, written from my mother's phone, but dripping with Rick's tone. Meet us Friday night. North Station. Platform 3. No excuses. My hands shook as I read it, my stomach knotting with the familiar dread. I could have ignored it, blocked the number, pretended I never saw it, but something inside me knew they would not let it go. Ignoring Rick was like throwing fuel on a fire. The more you tried to smother him, the hotter he burned. I told myself I would go not to give in, but to hear them out, to face them on my own terms. I was 19 now. I had a voice, a bank account, and a plan. I would not crumble the way I had when I was a child. Still, when I stepped off the red line and walked into North Station that Friday evening, my chest felt tight. The crowd was restless commuters spilling in every direction, the air thick with the smell of fast food and the metallic tang of the trains below. I pulled my jacket tighter and headed toward Platform 3, the place that had already become a battlefield once. Rick was waiting. His broad shoulders hunched forward, his jaw working like he was grinding his teeth to dust. Susan stood beside him, her purse clutched to her chest like a shield. She spotted me first, her eyes sweeping over me with the usual blend of disappointment and calculation. Rick didn't wait for me to speak. His voice boomed across the platform, cutting through the chatter of travelers. "Where is it, Emily? Where's the 75 grand?" Heads turned. A woman slowed her stride, her phone halfway to her ear. A man carrying a briefcase paused mid-step. Rick didn't care. He wanted an audience. He wanted the world to know that he was in charge. "Don't play dumb," he shouted. "You think I don't know the bank released it? Your daddy's little nest egg. You think you can keep that money from us after everything we did for you?" My throat tightened, but I forced my words steady. "Dad left it for me. Not you. Not Mom. Me." Susan's lips pressed into a thin line. She muttered something under her breath, but Rick's voice drowned her out. "You wouldn't have a roof over your head if it wasn't for us. You wouldn't have food in your stomach if it wasn't for me. That money belongs to this family, and I'm telling you right now you'll hand it over or you'll regret it." I felt my pulse hammer in my temples. People were watching, recording again, but that didn't calm me. It only made my humiliation sharper. "I'm not giving you anything I said." My voice cracked on the last word, but I didn't look away. Rick's face darkened rage, twisting his features. "Ungrateful brat," he spat. "You think you're better than us because some dead man left you a check. You're nothing without me. Nothing." He stepped closer, and I instinctively stepped back, bumping into the steel column behind me. My hands curled into fists at my sides. I told myself not to flinch, not to show fear, but my body remembered every bruise, every shove, every night I had spent praying he would leave me alone. Susan finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "Emily, just listen to him. This can all go smoothly if you do the right thing. We need that money. Your stepfather has debts. We're drowning. Don't be selfish." The word selfish snapped something inside me. My voice rose louder than I meant, breaking through the station noise. "Selfish? He's the one demanding money that doesn't belong to him. He's the one hurting me in front of strangers. Dad left that money so I could have a chance, not so you could hand it to a man who does nothing but destroy." Gasps from the crowd mixed with the echo of my words. My mother's face flushed with embarrassment, her eyes darting to the people recording on their phones. She hissed, "Lower your voice. Please, Emily, don't do this." Rick didn't give me time to respond. His hand shot out, gripping my arm with a force that made me wince. He yanked me forward, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with beer. "You bring it tomorrow, every cent, or I swear you'll regret the day you were born." I struggled, pulling against his grip, but his fingers dug deeper. A young man nearby shouted, "Let her go." Others began to move closer, uncertainty flickering across their faces. For a heartbeat, I thought someone might step in. But just like always, most people froze, watching but not acting. Susan touched Rick's shoulder, her voice sharp. "Enough, not here." Reluctantly, he released me, shoving me backward so hard I stumbled against the pole. My head snapped back, pain flaring where the last bruise had barely healed. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Rick glared at me one last time before turning toward the escalators. "Tomorrow," he growled. "Don't make me come find you." Susan gave me a look I couldn't read, half apology, half warning, before following him. The crowd slowly dispersed, some whispering, some shaking their heads. A woman touched my shoulder gently, asking if I was all right. I nodded mutely, though my body was trembling. Inside, I felt like I was breaking apart. The demand was clear: $75,000. The number rang in my ears louder than the train announcements overhead. They would not stop until they had it. They would follow me, corner me, drag me through public humiliation again and again until I gave in. For the first time, though, I realized something else. People had seen. Strangers had recorded. The truth of who Rick was and what my mother allowed could no longer be hidden behind the walls of our old house. I pressed my hand to the throbbing welt on my arm, breathing hard, and whispered to myself, "Not this time." The platform slowly emptied after Rick dragged my mother toward the escalators, his threats still echoing in my ears. My whole body trembled from the force of his grip, the pain in my arm radiating with every heartbeat. I pressed my sleeve against the tender spot, blinking away tears that blurred the world into streaks of light and shadow. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the cold concrete. Then I noticed someone hadn't moved. A conductor in uniform stood a few feet away, his dark cap tilted slightly back. His eyes locked on me instead of the departing train. He held a clipboard in one hand, but his knuckles were white against it, his jaw set so tight that I could see the muscle twitch from where I stood. Most employees at North Station looked detached, as if chaos was routine. This man looked furious. He started walking toward me, his steps purposeful but measured. I tensed instinctively, bracing myself the way I always did when a man approached too quickly. But then he slowed, keeping a deliberate distance as if to show me he meant no harm. His voice, when it came, was low but steady. "Miss, are you hurt? Do you need me to call the police?" I shook my head, words catching in my throat. "No, I'm fine." The lie felt brittle even as it left my lips. His eyes flicked to the bruise on my cheek, the way I held my arm close to my body, and he didn't believe me for a second. Still, he didn't push. Instead, he reached into his pocket and offered me a folded packet of tissues. My hand trembled as I took it, pressing it to the corner of my mouth where blood lingered. "Thank you," I whispered. When I finally lifted my eyes to his face, something jolted inside me. His hair was streaked with gray. Now, his features weathered by time, but the shape of his nose, the set of his eyes, they were familiar. I had seen them in photographs buried in a shoebox years ago in the rare moments when my father's family still felt like mine. My chest tightened, my breath catching as recognition flared. The conductor's eyes widened too, and his voice softened, almost breaking. Emily. My knees nearly buckled. Uncle Ben. The words slipped out before I could stop them. His clipboard clattered to the ground as he stepped closer, disbelief etched across his face. "I can't believe it," he murmured. "It's been so long." My vision blurred again, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from the flood of memories I had locked away. Uncle Ben Walker, my father's younger brother, had been a constant presence in my early years. He used to visit on weekends, bringing toy trains and telling me stories about the real ones he worked around. He smelled of engine grease and peppermint gum, and his laugh filled our tiny living room with warmth. And then, suddenly, he was gone. I remembered asking my mother why Uncle Ben didn't come anymore, why his calls stopped. She had pursed her lips and told me he was unreliable, that he didn't care about us. I was 6. I believed her. Now, standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of North Station, I saw the truth written on his face. He had cared. He had been pushed out. I tried. He said, his voice rough. "After your father died, I wanted to be there for you. But your mother." He stopped, shaking his head as if the words were too heavy. "She made sure I couldn't." My hands clenched around the tissue's fury and relief battling inside me. All those years I thought he had abandoned me. All those nights I told myself family wasn't safe, that I had no one left but myself. And here he was in uniform, steady, and real eyes full of sorrow for the years lost. "They want the money," I whispered, my voice breaking. 75,000. Dad left it for me. They're trying to take it. His jaw hardened the same way my father's had when he was determined. "Then we'll make sure they don't." The word hit me like a shockwave. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone. Uncle Ben crouched to pick up his clipboard, straightening with a calm that didn't match the storm in his eyes. He glanced around at the lingering commuters, still whispering, still filming, and then looked back at me. "You're not going home with them tonight," he said firmly. "Come with me. We need to talk." My heart raced, but I nodded. Because in that moment, with the echo of Rick's threats still buzzing in my ears, I realized something had shifted. My father's blood still ran in someone else's veins, and that someone had just stepped back into my life at the exact moment I needed him most. Ben led me out of North Station through a side exit, away from the murmuring commuters and the glow of camera phones. The cold Boston night hit my face like a slap, sobering me. My legs still trembled, but his steady stride grounded me. He didn't touch my arm, didn't try to steer me, just walked a half step ahead, letting me decide to follow. We ended up in a small cafe a few blocks away, one of those places that smelled of strong espresso and burnt bagels with chipped tables and too bright lights. The clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation made it feel safe, anonymous. Ben ordered 2 coffees without asking, then slid into the booth across from me. For a few moments he just looked at me, his eyes scanning the bruise on my cheek, the swelling at my lip. He didn't ask if Rick had done it. He already knew. "I should have been there," he said finally, voice low but fierce. "I tried Emily. After your dad died, I came by. I called. I sent letters. Susan always sent them back. Said you didn't want to see me, that it was confusing you." He shook his head. "I believed her for too long. By the time I realized what she was doing, she'd already cut me out completely." I stared into the steam rising from my cup, anger and grief swirling together. "I thought you left. I thought you didn't care." His eyes softened. "Not a day went by that I didn't think of you. But tonight, when I saw him put his hands on you, that's when I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." I swallowed hard. "They want the money. Dad's trust fund. 75,000. They keep saying it's family money." Ben leaned forward, his voice tightening. "It's not family money. It's yours. Your father set that up for you, and only you. And if Rick is desperate enough to shout about it in a train station, it means his back is against the wall." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. "I've been keeping tabs even from a distance. Rick's got debt in Worcester. Gambling, unpaid loans, credit cards maxed. He's been borrowing against Susan's name, too. They're drowning Emily, and they see you as the lifeline. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. I knew he was bad, but I didn't know it was this bad. Ben hesitated, then added, "It's worse than you think. A buddy of mine in Boston PD checked some records for me." Rick's had 2 restraining orders in the past. One from a girlfriend before Susan, another from a neighbor. Both said the same thing: violent temper threats, intimidation. He let the words hang there. "It's a pattern, Emily. He doesn't just do this to you." The room tilted for a moment as if my world had shifted again. I had always believed my suffering was personal, that somehow I brought it on myself by being too loud, too stubborn. But hearing that others had seen the same rage that he had left scars on lives beyond mine cracked that belief wide open. Ben watched me carefully. "You're not safe if they think they can pressure you into handing over that money. And Susan!" His jaw tightened. "She's not just enabling him. She's complicit." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He pulled out another slip of paper, sliding it across the table. My eyes scanned the numbers, not understanding at first. Then I saw my own name printed across the top. A credit card statement. Dozens of charges, none of which I recognized. My heart lurched. "She used your social security number," Ben explained quietly. "Opened accounts in your name. Thousands of dollars. You're already in debt you didn't even know existed." I pressed a hand to my mouth, bile rising. "She stole from me. She betrayed you," Ben corrected. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "And she'll keep doing it until someone stops her." Tears blurred my vision, anger and despair tangling in my chest. I don't know how to fight them. They're louder, they're older, they don't care what people think. I've spent my whole life trying to stay small so they wouldn't notice me. And now you don't have to be small anymore," Ben interrupted gently. "You have the truth. You have proof. And you have me." For the first time that night, I let myself believe it. Maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe the fight I had always dreaded was no longer just mine to carry. I sat in that cafe staring at the credit card statement until the words blurred. My name was printed there in bold letters, but none of the purchases belonged to me. Department stores in Worcester, online orders I had never placed, a payday loan with my social security number attached. Each line was another betrayal, another reminder that my mother had chosen Rick's survival over my future. My chest ached with the weight of it. "I can't pay this," I whispered. "Even if I gave them the trust fund, it wouldn't be enough." Ben's expression was grim, but steady. "That's why you're not giving them a dime. Listen to me, Emily. This isn't just family drama anymore. This is fraud, identity theft, extortion, the kind of crimes that carry prison time." His words made me shiver. Prison. For my mother. For Rick. A part of me recoiled at the thought she was still my mother, but another part of me, the part still stinging from her command to keep quiet in the station, whispered that maybe it was the only way. Ben leaned closer, his voice dropping. "We need evidence. The videos from the station are good, but they'll try to spin it. They'll say it was a family dispute taken out of context. What we need is a trail that shows exactly what they've done. Bank records, phone messages, documents in your name. If we build a case, the courts will protect that money and they'll answer for what they've stolen." The idea of dragging my mother into court made my stomach twist, but the thought of handing over everything my father had saved made me sick in another way. I thought of his calloused hands, the way he used to lift me onto his shoulders, the way he promised I would go further than he ever could. He hadn't worked himself to death so Rick could gamble it away. He had trusted me to be strong. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice trembling. Ben didn't look away. "You can. You already stood up to him in front of a crowd. You didn't give him what he wanted even when he had his hands on you. That's strength, Emily. All we're doing now is giving that strength the proof it needs." I wiped at my eyes, nodding slowly. "Where do we start?" He pulled out a small notebook from his jacket, flipping it open to a list already half filled. "First, we get the videos from the people who recorded tonight. I saw at least 4 phones pointed at you. That footage will show exactly what he did and how your mother reacted. Second, we request your credit report. It'll list every account opened in your name. If Susan signed anything, it's there. Third, we go to the bank. The trust fund has to be locked down legally so they can't touch it. My buddy in the department can connect us with a victim's advocate. They'll know how to file the right paperwork. Listening to him speak with such certainty steadied me. For years, I had been drifting through fear, reacting instead of planning. Now there was a path. Painful, yes. Scary, absolutely. But a path. The cafe door opened and a gust of cold air swept in, making me shiver. I imagined Rick storming through that door, imagined him ripping the notebook from Ben's hands. Fear clawed at me again, but I forced it down. This was why he had power over me, because he thrived on my silence. I straightened in my seat. Okay, I'll do it. Whatever it takes. Ben's eyes softened, pride flickering there. That's my niece. We left the cafe and stepped back into the night. The city hummed around us, taxis honking, trains rumbling below the streets. For the first time in years, the noise didn't feel suffocating. It felt like possibility. As we walked toward the station where his shift wasn't yet finished, I felt the bruises on my face and arm ache with each step. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. Determination. I whispered it to myself like a vow. No more silence. The call came 3 nights later, just after my diner shift ended. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, and against my better judgment, I answered. The voice on the other end was shaky thin. Emily, it's your mother. I froze in the alley behind the diner, the smell of grease and cigarettes clinging to my clothes. For a heartbeat, I almost hung up. Then she said the words that stopped me cold. I'm at Mass General. Please, I need you. My first thought was that it was a trick, another attempt to lure me somewhere Rick could corner me. But when I arrived at the hospital, my suspicion gave way to something stranger. There she was, lying in a narrow bed, her wrist wrapped in gauze, her face pale. A nurse explained she'd been in a minor car accident, nothing life-threatening but enough to rattle her. The part that stunned me was what came next. Your husband dropped you off, the nurse asked. Susan's lips tightened and she whispered, No. He left me. I stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, unsure what to feel. This was the woman who had iced my bruises in silence, who had told me to lower my voice while Rick humiliated me in public. Now she looked smaller, older, stripped of the authority she had always worn like armor. She reached for me with trembling fingers. Emily, please. I can't do this without you. Something inside me cracked, but it wasn't sympathy. It was exhaustion. You can't do what survive without me covering for him. Get out of debt without stealing from me. My voice rose despite the quiet of the ward. What exactly is it you can't do? Mom. Tears welled in her eyes. I made mistakes, but I stayed because I was afraid. You don't understand what he's like when no one else is around. A bitter laugh escaped me. Who do you think he practiced on every shove, every slap, every word that cut me down? You watched it. You let it happen. And you told me to respect him. She shook her head weakly. I thought, if I kept him calm, if I gave him what he wanted, maybe he wouldn't hurt us worse. I took a step closer, my hands trembling. You thought wrong. He hurt us anyway, and now you expect me to save you. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I thought of the credit card statement with my name on it, the debt I hadn't created. I thought of her voice at the station, sharp and cold, telling me not to embarrass her while blood ran down my chin. My chest tightened, but not with pity, with clarity. I used to beg for you to notice me, I said softly. Every time he knocked me down, I looked at you hoping you'd stand up. And every time you turned away. Family is who shows up, Mom. You never did. Her tears spilled over her shoulders, shaking. Emily, I'm sorry. The words should have meant something. They should have healed even a little, but they fell flat like a script she barely remembered. I took a deep breath and shook my head. It's too late. The monitor beeped steadily beside her. Nurses walked past in the hallway, their shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Life moved on indifferent to the wreckage between us. I turned to leave, but she called after me, desperation cracking her voice. Please, you're still my daughter. I paused at the door, my hand on the frame. "And you were supposed to be my mother." Then I walked out, the sound of her sobs following me down the hall. Outside the hospital, the night air was sharp, carrying the faint scent of salt from the harbor. I leaned against the cold stone wall, my chest heaving. For the first time, I felt no guilt in turning away. She had chosen Rick over me too many times. Tonight, I chose myself. I pulled out my phone and texted Ben. "She's in the hospital. He left her." I told her no. His reply came fast. "Proud of you. This is the turning point. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we take the next step." I slipped the phone back into my pocket, staring at the glowing lights of the city. My father's words came back to me, words from an old birthday card I had kept hidden under my pillow. "Be strong, Emily. Stronger than me. Stronger than anything life throws your way." For the first time, I believed I was. The Suffolk County Courthouse loomed tall against the gray Boston sky, its columns weathered by decades of storms and verdicts. I stood at the steps, clutching a folder that felt heavier than stone. Inside were the documents Ben had helped me gather, credit reports with fraudulent accounts in my name, copies of the restraining orders against Rick, printed screenshots of threatening messages, and sworn statements from witnesses who had recorded what happened at North Station. Each page was a piece of truth I had carried like armor. When I walked through the doors, the echo of my shoes against the marble floor made my stomach twist. I had imagined this moment 100 times. Sometimes I pictured myself trembling, my voice failing. Other times I imagined standing tall, unbreakable. The reality was, somewhere in between, my hands shook, but my back stayed straight. I was tired of shrinking. Ben walked beside me, his conductor's uniform replaced with a dark suit that made him look older, sterner. "Remember," he murmured, "this is not about their words anymore. It's about the evidence. The judge doesn't care how loud Rick shouts. He cares about what we can prove." We entered the courtroom, the air heavy with the smell of wood polish and tension. Rick sat at the defense table in a wrinkled suit that did nothing to hide his bulk. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched on the table, knuckles white. Susan sat beside him, her hair pulled back, her eyes darting nervously. She looked smaller than I remembered, but my sympathy had dried up in the hospital that night. When she finally glanced at me, her eyes begged. I looked away. The judge entered, and everyone rose. The bailiff called for order, and the proceedings began. The prosecutor, a calm woman with sharp eyes, rose first. She laid out the charges in a clear voice: assault and battery, financial fraud, identity theft, extortion. The words struck like hammer blows, each one reminding me that this was no longer a family squabble whispered behind closed doors. This was law. The prosecutor presented the first exhibit, the videos from North Station. One by one, the screens flickered to life, showing Rick shouting, grabbing my arm, shoving me into the pole, while Susan told me to lower my voice. The courtroom was silent except for the hiss of the speakers. My stomach knotted watching it again, but there was a strange satisfaction too. It was no longer just my word against his. The world could see what had happened. Rick's attorney objected, muttering about context, about family disputes being exaggerated. The judge overruled him, his expression stern. "The evidence speaks for itself," he said. Next came the credit reports laid out in meticulous order. My name, my social security number, accounts opened without my knowledge. Thousands of dollars in charges. The prosecutor asked me to take the stand. My knees wobbled as I walked forward, but Ben's nod steadied me. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The prosecutor asked simple questions first. My name, my age, my relationship to the defendants. Then came the harder ones. Did I recognize the charges listed on the statements? No. Had I ever authorized my mother to use my social security number? No. Had I ever consented to Rick handling my finances? Never. I explained how I discovered the accounts, how I had lived frugally in Dorchester while debt ballooned in my name. My voice trembled at first, but the more I spoke, the stronger I felt. Each answer was a stone placed carefully on the foundation of truth we were building. Then came the cross-examination. Rick's attorney leaned forward, his smile thin. "Miss Harper, isn't it true that your mother supported you financially for years after your father passed? Isn't it possible she opened these accounts with your knowledge, assuming it was shared family money?" I met his gaze. My father left money specifically for me, not for them. And no, I never gave permission. What she did was theft. He tried to rattle me, asking about arguments at home, implying I was a rebellious teenager, exaggerating. But when he suggested the videos might not tell the full story, I couldn't hold back. That video shows exactly what happened. I said, my voice steady. For years, no one believed me. Now you don't have to take my word for it. You can see it with your own eyes. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge's eyes softened briefly before he motioned for silence. When I stepped down from the stand, my heart pounded, but my steps felt lighter. I had spoken. I had been heard. The prosecutor then called Ben. He testified about what he witnessed at the station, about the years of being cut off by Susan, about the documents he helped uncover. His voice was calm, professional, but every word carried weight. Rick glared at him with pure hatred, but Ben didn't flinch. By the time the morning session ended, the evidence had painted a damning picture. Assault caught on video. Fraud documented in black and white. A pattern of violence stretching back years. As the judge called a recess, I glanced across the aisle. Rick's face was red, his jaw clenched, veins bulging at his temples. Susan sat rigid, her hands twisting in her lap, her lips moving as if in silent prayer. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she prayed for forgiveness or simply for escape. I stepped into the hallway, my chest heaving. The courthouse buzzed with voices, reporters murmuring about the case. Cameras flashed as we walked past, but I kept my eyes forward. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. Ben placed a hand on my shoulder, steady and firm. "You did good," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we finish it." The second day of testimony dawned gray and damp, the kind of morning where the city felt like it was holding its breath. I arrived at the courthouse with my heart pounding, my folder clutched tighter than ever. Reporters clustered outside, cameras snapping as soon as Ben and I appeared. I kept my chin up, refusing to let their questions rattle me. This was no longer about whispers behind closed doors. It was about truth in the open air. Inside, the defense tried its best to twist the narrative. Rick's attorney painted him as a hardworking man under stress, a stepfather who had provided for a difficult teenager. Susan's lawyer claimed she had only acted out of desperation, that her fraudulent accounts were mistakes born from financial panic. But the weight of the evidence was too heavy to ignore. Every time the defense tried to reframe, the prosecutor answered with documents, videos, and witnesses who spoke clearly of what they had seen. The most powerful moment came when the prosecutor played the station video one last time for the jury. The grainy footage showed Rick's hand gripping my arm, his shove slamming me against the pole, and my mother's chilling words. "Lower your voice. Don't embarrass us." The room was silent except for the hiss of the speakers. I saw jurors shift in their seats, their expressions tightening. The truth needed no embellishment. Then it was time for closing statements. The prosecutor's voice rang steady. She spoke of betrayal of trust, broken of a young woman targeted not only by a violent stepfather but by her own mother. "This case is not about family squabbles," she said, her eyes sweeping the jury. "It is about crimes, assault, fraud, theft, crimes that leave scars not only on bodies but on futures. Emily Harper deserves justice, and today you have the power to deliver it." Rick's attorney rose next, his tone blustering. He painted me as dramatic, insisting the videos lacked context, that the credit reports were misunderstandings. He gestured wildly, but his words felt hollow in the heavy air of the courtroom. Susan's lawyer followed, pleading for mercy, her voice soft, almost apologetic. She asked the jury to see Susan as a victim of Rick's control. But I knew the truth. She had made her choices again and again. When the jury filed out to deliberate, my stomach twisted into knots. Minutes stretched into hours. Ben and I sat in silence on the wooden bench, the smell of polish and old paper surrounding us. My leg bounced nervously. I told myself I was ready for any outcome, but inside I burned with the need for them to see, to understand. Finally, the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict. We stood as they filed back in, solemn and quiet. My heart thundered so loud I barely heard the clerk read the charges one by one. On assault and battery, guilty. On fraud and identity theft, guilty. On attempted extortion, guilty." The words seemed to echo, filling every corner of the room. Rick's face went red, his fists clenching as if he might leap from his seat. Susan's shoulders sagged, her eyes wet, but her mouth set in a line that revealed she already knew this moment was coming. The judge's voice was stern. "Mr. Donnelly, your pattern of violence is well documented. Your intimidation, your greed, your disregard for the law leave this court no choice. You are hereby sentenced to 20 years in state prison." Rick slammed his fist on the table, his voice booming in protest, but the bailiffs moved swiftly, pinning his arms, hauling him to his feet. His shouts echoed down the hall as they dragged him away. The judge turned to Susan. "Mrs. Harper, your actions enabled these crimes. You committed fraud against your own daughter. You placed her future in jeopardy for the sake of covering your debts. For this, you are sentenced to 6 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 4. Susan wept openly, then reaching toward me as if I might soften. I stayed still. My chest ached, but my feet did not move. I had given her too many chances already. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Just like that, it was done. Reporters swarmed as soon as I stepped into the hallway, their voices overlapping microphones thrust forward. "Emily, how does it feel? Do you have anything to say about your mother's sentence? What's next for you?" I raised my chin, my voice steady. "What's next is peace, and I hope others who feel trapped know that silence doesn't protect them. Speaking does." The flash of cameras lit my face as Ben's hand rested on my shoulder. Together, we walked down the courthouse steps into the cool afternoon air. For the first time in years, I felt like the weight pressing on my chest had lifted. Justice had been spoken out loud, not hidden behind whispers or excuses. As we crossed the plaza, I thought of my father. I imagined him watching, nodding proud that I had found the strength he had hoped for me. The trust fund was safe, but more than that, my voice was safe. My life was mine again. The verdict was barely an hour old when the first video hit the internet. A shaky clip from North Station, the one where Rick's hand clamped around my arm and shoved me into the pole, spread like wildfire. It bounced from TikTok to Facebook, reposted with captions that screamed outrage. By evening, the hashtag #HatchJusticeForEmily was trending. Strangers who had never met me were writing paragraphs about what they saw about the girl who stood bloodied while her own mother told her to lower her voice. At first, I avoided looking. I was still raw from the courtroom, still trembling from the echo of the gavel. But when Ben handed me his phone, showing me a feed filled with messages of support, I couldn't look away. There were thousands of comments. People said they wished they had spoken up at the station. Others said they had been in my place once silenced by family, and my story gave them courage. Some shared their own bruises, their own betrayals. It was overwhelming, a flood of voices that made me realize I was no longer alone in a dark corner. News outlets picked up the story by the next morning. Local anchors replayed the footage with solemn expressions, their voices heavy with condemnation. National programs followed, calling it a case of betrayal, greed, and resilience. One segment on a morning show read aloud from my testimony the part where I said, "For years, no one believed me. Now you can see it with your own eyes." Hearing my own words on television sent chills down my spine. Meanwhile, Rick's name became poison. Old colleagues in Worcester spoke to reporters about his temper, about debts he never paid. Businesses that had once tolerated him publicly distanced themselves. His mugshot eyes, blazing with fury, appeared on every screen. 20 years behind bars meant he was finished, but the public outrage buried any shred of sympathy he might have clung to. Susan's downfall was quieter but no less brutal. Her circle of friends, the women she had clung to for gossip and validation, turned their backs. Photos of her smiling at neighborhood parties resurfaced online, paired with headlines about fraud and betrayal. Neighbors whispered about how she had stolen from her own daughter, how she had stood by a man who hurt me. Some said prison was too light for her. Others said she was as much a villain as Rick. For me, the fallout was dizzying. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages from strangers offering support from journalists, requesting interviews from advocacy groups, inviting me to speak. I had spent my life shrinking, trying to be invisible. Now the world saw me, and they demanded my story. It wasn't all comforting. Mixed among the supportive comments were cruel ones, people accusing me of exaggerating, of enjoying the spotlight. But each time doubt crept in, I remembered the jury's verdict, the judge's gavel, and the truth captured on video. No amount of cynicism could erase that. At the diner, regulars who had known me only as the quiet waitress with tired eyes looked at me differently. Some pressed extra bills into my hand, whispering, "Stay strong." Others asked if I was really that girl from the news. My boss offered me time off, worried about the attention, but I refused. Routine kept me steady. Carrying plates and pouring coffee grounded me in a way cameras never could. One evening, a group of college students came in. They recognized me immediately, whispering among themselves before one of them finally approached. "You're Emily Harper, right? We saw your testimony. You're incredible." Their words made my face flush, but also lit something warm in my chest. For years, I had believed my voice didn't matter. Now it echoed in strangers' hearts. Ben stayed close through it all. He deflected reporters when I was too tired to answer, drove me to quiet corners of the city when I needed to breathe. He reminded me that attention fades, but healing endures. Still, he admitted he was proud that I had taken the stand, proud that the truth was finally undeniable. Late one night, scrolling through comments, I saw a message that stopped me cold. It was from someone who claimed to be the neighbor who had filed one of the restraining orders against Rick years ago. She wrote, "I'm sorry. I saw what he was. I tried to warn people. I wish I had done more. Watching you in court gave me closure too." Tears slid down my cheeks as I read it again. For the first time, I realized my fight wasn't just mine. It rippled outward, giving voice to people who had been silent too long. The fallout hit hardest when I realized the shift inside me. For years, shame had weighed me down like chains. Now, shame belonged to Rick and Susan. The world knew who they were. And I no longer carried their secrets. The courthouse had barely settled into memory when another surprise surfaced. It came in the form of a thick envelope from an attorney in Worcester. At first, I thought it was more paperwork about Rick and Susan's sentencing. My hands trembled as I slid it open, bracing for another wave of obligations I wasn't ready for. But inside was something else entirely: property records, lease agreements, and a faded deed bearing my father's name. I sat at my small table in Dorchester, spreading the documents out like puzzle pieces. The story they told made my breath hitch. The house I had grown up in, the place where my father's laughter once filled the rooms before Rick's anger drowned it out, had never been sold. Susan had claimed she let it go years ago, saying the upkeep was too much. But the deed showed otherwise. The house was still ours legally, mine, now that my father's estate had passed fully into my name. For over a decade, Susan had been renting it out, pocketing the income while I scraped by above a laundromat. Shock rippled through me, followed quickly by anger. That house wasn't just brick and wood. It was my childhood. My father's sweat soaked into every beam, his presence lingering in the walls. And she had stolen it from me, just as she had stolen my credit, my peace, my trust. I called Ben immediately. Within an hour, he was at my door, the papers spread out again between us. His brow furrowed as he read. "She hid this from you all these years," he said quietly. "This house is worth more than $380,000 now, and she never meant for you to see it." I stared at the deed, tears pricking my eyes. "It's mine, Ben. It was always supposed to be mine." He nodded. "Then let's make sure it's returned to you officially. No more secrets." The process took weeks, but after everything else, I was no stranger to paperwork. The court confirmed what the documents showed: the house was part of my father's estate, and by law it belonged to me. Susan's attempts to siphon money from it had been illegal. The tenants who had lived there for years were notified their leases expired, and for the first time in over a decade, the front door of that old Worcester house belonged solely to me. The day I drove out there, the sky was clear and cold, the kind of Massachusetts morning where the air smelled of wood smoke and frost. The neighborhood looked the same as I remembered: narrow streets lined with maples, the faint hum of children playing somewhere in the distance. My chest tightened as I pulled into the cracked driveway. The house stood tall, its white paint peeling the shutters, hanging crooked, but it was still beautiful to me. I ran my hand along the railing of the porch, the wood worn smooth in places where my father's grip must have lingered. Memories flooded back birthday cakes in the kitchen, the hum of his voice fixing something in the garage, the way he lifted me to hang ornaments on the Christmas tree. I unlocked the door with the new keys, my heart thudding. The air inside smelled of dust and disuse, but beneath it lingered something familiar. Home. I walked from room to room, my footsteps echoing on hardwood floors that creaked the same way they had when I was little. The living room window still bore the faint scratch where I had once etched my initials with a safety pin. The stairs groaned under my weight, each creak carrying me closer to the girl I had been and the woman I was becoming. In my old bedroom, faded wallpaper peeled at the corners. I traced the outline of the stars I had once stuck to the ceiling, faint shadows of glow-in-the-dark constellations that had guided me through restless nights. I sat on the floor pressing my back to the wall and let the tears fall freely. This was mine. Not stolen, not silenced, not hidden. Mine. Ben arrived an hour later carrying a toolbox and a smile that softened his stern features. "Looks like we've got work to do," he said. Together we began the slow process of reclaiming the house. We scrubbed floors, patched holes, repainted walls. Each brushstroke felt like erasing Rick's shadow, like reclaiming space that had been stolen. Neighbors stopped by, some remembering my father, others simply offering a hand. Word had spread quickly thanks to the trial and the news coverage. People brought casseroles, paint supplies, even a second-hand couch. For years I had been isolated, convinced I had no one. Now I saw community rising around me brick by brick, helping me build a life from the ruins. One evening, as the sun set behind the maples, I stood on the porch with Ben. The house still needed work, but it glowed softly in the fading light. I inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling my lungs. "I never thought I'd come back here," I admitted. Ben placed a hand on the railing. "Your father would be proud. You fought for this. You fought for yourself." I looked at the house, at the street where I had learned to ride a bike, at the window where my father had waved each morning before work. And for the first time in years, I felt not just safe, but rooted. This was more than a house. It was a legacy. It was proof that no matter how deep Rick and Susan had tried to bury me, I had risen back to claim what was mine. The house in Worcester slowly transformed from a hollow shell into a place of warmth again. Each day I scrubbed and painted, each repair bin guided me through, felt like stitching together a wound that had been open for years. But healing wasn't just about walls and floors. It was about people too, the kind I had never believed would stand beside me. It was Ben who first suggested the support group. "There's a meeting at the community center," he said one evening as we stacked boxes in the garage. "Survivors of abuse. People who know what it's like to be silenced. I think you'd feel less alone there." I hesitated, my instinct telling me to keep my story close. For years, silence had been my armor. Speaking meant risk. But then I remembered the way my voice had echoed in the courtroom, the way strangers online had said my words gave them courage. Maybe speaking could also mean freedom. So I went. The group was small tin chairs in a circle, fluorescent lights humming overhead. At first, I just listened. A woman in her 40s spoke about leaving a husband who tracked every dollar she spent. A young man described how his stepmother used words as weapons until he believed he was worthless. Each story felt like looking into a mirror, different details, but the same ache. When my turn came, my hands trembled, but I opened my mouth anyway. I told them about Rick, about Susan, about the station and the courtroom and the house I had finally reclaimed. And when I finished, the room was silent for a moment before someone whispered, "Thank you." That single phrase carried me forward. Week after week, I returned. Slowly, I began to share more, not just the pain, but the victories. The night I slept in my Worcester bedroom without nightmares. The afternoon I painted the living room yellow, the color my father once said reminded him of sunlight. The morning I woke up and realized I felt safe. The group began to call me a mentor, someone who gave hope simply by showing what survival looked like. It was humbling and healing in ways I hadn't expected. Ben became my anchor outside those meetings. He moved into a small apartment a few streets away, close enough that I could see his porch light glowing when I walked at night. He taught me how to change locks, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to plant tomatoes in the backyard come spring. But more than that, he showed me what family could be when it wasn't built on control or fear. Sometimes we sat on the porch together in silence, watching the sun sink behind the trees. Other times he told me stories about my father, how he used to whistle while he worked, how he once wired a neighbor's entire house for free because they couldn't afford the bill. Those stories stitched pieces of my father back into me, filling gaps I thought were gone forever. One afternoon, as we finished repairing the steps, Ben set his hammer down and looked at me with quiet pride. "You know, your dad once told me you were the strongest person he knew, even at 6 years old." He was right. Tears stung my eyes, but this time they weren't from grief. They were from the weight of being seen, truly seen. Life wasn't perfect. There were still nights when memories woke me when I flinched at sudden noises. But there was light now, where before there had only been shadows. My community had widened from neighbors who dropped off pies to survivors who messaged me late at night when they felt alone. I was no longer the girl hiding bruises under long sleeves. I was the woman rebuilding, the woman choosing who to call family. And in that choice, I found peace. The letter from my father had become a kind of compass one I read whenever the noise of the past threatened to drown me. Be strong, but more than that, be kind. I used to think those words meant I had to endure quietly, to forgive endlessly, to accept whatever was thrown at me. But sitting in my Worcester home, the house he had once worked so hard to build, I finally understood. Strength wasn't silence. It wasn't submission. It was the act of standing up, of refusing to be broken even when breaking would have been easier. And kindness, it wasn't about excusing cruelty. It was about preserving my own humanity despite what had been done to me. The night after Susan's sentencing, I sat on the back porch with Ben. The air was cool, the scent of rain heavy in the distance. I held the letter in my hands, its paper worn from rereading. "Do you think he'd be proud?" I asked. My voice cracked, carrying more vulnerability than I meant to show. Ben didn't answer right away. He watched the clouds roll across the horizon, his face lit faintly by the porch light. Proud Emily, he'd be in awe. You faced things no one should have to. You fought back in ways that saved not just yourself, but others too. That's not just strength. That's legacy. Legacy. The word settled into me like an anchor. For so long, my life had felt like survival, nothing more. Now there was something bigger, a chance to build, to guide, to leave behind something better than what I had inherited. The following week at the survivors group, I shared that letter aloud for the first time. My voice shook on the words, "Be kind," but by the end, I was steady. The women and men around me listened intently, their eyes soft with understanding. When I finished, Miranda, a survivor who had endured her own storm, reached out and squeezed my hand. "That's the kind of wisdom that keeps us alive," she said. It struck me then that our stories had power. They were more than painful memories. They were bridges. They connected people across distances of age and background, letting them see that they weren't alone, that the wounds they carried could eventually scar over into something stronger. One evening, not long after I received an email from a young woman at UMass Boston, she'd seen a local news article about the trial and recognized me as the girl who sometimes sat alone in the cafeteria with a laptop. She wrote that my story gave her courage to leave an abusive relationship. I read her words twice, 3 times until the tears blurred the screen. That was when I knew my survival mattered not just for me, but for others watching quietly from the edges. The public's reaction had been overwhelming at times. Clips of the station incident had circulated across social media tagged with #JusticeForEmily. At first, the attention terrified me, but as I scrolled through comments, thousands of strangers expressing support, sharing their own painful histories, I realized something important. By telling the truth, by refusing to be silent, I had opened a door for countless others to do the same. Still, healing wasn't linear. There were days when the weight of Susan's betrayal pressed heavily on me, when memories of Rick's hand crashing across my face made me flinch at shadows. But instead of hiding from those moments, I leaned into them. I reminded myself of the courtroom, of the sound of the gavel sealing 20 years behind bars. I reminded myself of Ben's presence, steady and unwavering. And I reminded myself of my father's words, "Strength and kindness together." On a quiet Sunday morning, I found myself standing in the backyard near the old swing set newly restored by a local carpenter. The chains no longer rusted the seat, no longer splintered. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a neighbor's yard, a sound that once would have hurt, but now felt like a promise. I sat down, pushed gently with my feet, and let the rhythm carry me. I thought about the girl I had been, the child gripping her mother's sleeve, the teenager hiding college brochures, the young woman bleeding on a train platform. I wanted to tell her, you make it out, you fight back, you find family that shows up. And then I thought about the people listening, the ones who clicked on my story late at night while their own houses echoed with silence or anger. Maybe they wondered if they could survive, if anyone would believe them. To them, I wanted to say the only way out is through. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But it is possible. And you deserve it. If you've ever had to stand up to a toxic family member, if you've ever chosen yourself when someone demanded your silence, I want to hear from you. Drop your story in the comments. Someone out there might need exactly your words to find the courage to take their first step. And if this journey resonated with you, please subscribe. There are more stories to tell, more voices to amplify, more proof that survival is possible. In the weeks that followed, I found myself walking through the Worcester house with a different set of eyes. It was no longer just a shelter or even a symbol of victory. It was a place where new stories would be written, where my father's words would live, not only in a letter, but in the choices I made daily. I decided to turn one of the front rooms into a small library and meeting space. Bookshelves lined the walls, a donated rug softened the creaking floor, and mismatched chairs formed a circle. On Tuesday nights, survivors gathered here instead of at the community center. They brought their coffee mugs and their trembling voices, and they left a little stronger each time. The group even chose a new name, Rick's Refugees, not because we wanted his shadow to define us, but because we wanted to show the world how far we had outrun it. One evening, a young woman named Carla stood in the circle and said quietly, "I thought I was the only one, but here I see I'm not, and that means I can survive too." The room nodded, and I felt my father's words humming like electricity in the air. Strong and kind. That was what we were building together. Ben became a fixture in these gatherings. He didn't always speak, but his presence was a comfort. Sometimes he shared stories about my father, and the way his voice cracked when he laughed made me believe healing didn't just belong to me, it belonged to him too. Together, we had reclaimed not only a house, but a family, one chosen by loyalty rather than blood. My professors at UMass noticed the change as well. I wasn't the quiet girl in the back anymore, afraid of being seen. I spoke up in class. I started a project on financial literacy for young women, teaching them how to protect their credit, how to recognize the red flags of control. The trust fund my father had left me was no longer just money, it was a foundation. I invested part of it into programs that supported survivors. Each dollar became a declaration that what Rick and Susan had tried to take from me would now be used to build futures for others. There were still moments when pain flickered back, nights when a sound in the dark reminded me of Rick's footsteps, or when I caught a whiff of my mother's perfume in a crowd and my chest tightened. But those moments didn't control me anymore. They passed like shadows, leaving behind the light I had built. On the anniversary of the trial's verdict, I sat on the porch with Ben, sipping tea as the autumn leaves scattered across the yard. The house behind us glowed with fresh paint and laughter from the group inside. I unfolded the letter from my father again, the edges worn soft. I read it aloud this time without tears choking my voice. "Be strong, but more than that, be kind." When I finished, Ben raised his mug in a quiet toast. "To your father," he said, "and to the woman who lived those words." The final lesson I realized wasn't just about surviving. It was about choosing how to live afterward. I could have stayed bitter, closed off, convinced that family only meant betrayal. Instead, I had opened doors. I had built something from ashes. That was the truest form of strength. And so, if you're listening now, if you've carried scars from people who were supposed to love you, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not alone. The shame belongs to them, not you. Your voice matters even if it shakes. And when you stand, others will see you and find the courage to rise too. I'd love to know, have you ever had to stand up against someone in your own family? How did you find the strength? Share your story in the comments because someone reading might need your words tonight. And if my journey spoke to you, subscribe to this channel. Together, we can make sure no one feels they have to fight in silence ever again.